The 1980s were wild for hay balers. While everyone remembers the big names that survived, there were dozens of brilliant machines that solved real problems, pushed technology forward, and then just disappeared. Today, we're digging into 10 forgotten hay balers from the 80s that deserved way better than history gave them. These weren't failures, they were ahead of their time, too expensive, too weird, or just plain unlucky. Let's bring them back into the light. Number 10. The Sperry New Holland 855. Before New Holland became just New Holland, they were Sperry New Holland. And in 1982, they released the 855 round baler that almost nobody remembers today. This machine was Sperry's attempt to compete in the exploding round baler market, and they came at it from a completely different angle than everyone else. While most round balers of the early 80s used either belts or chains to form the bale, the 855 used what Sperry called a combination chamber system. It had both belts and chains working together, with the chains handling the initial pickup and core formation, then the belts taking over for the final compression and shaping. The idea was brilliant: use the strengths of both systems and eliminate the weaknesses. The chains were great at handling heavy, wet material that would slip on belts. The belts were better at creating uniform density and smooth bale surfaces. Together, they should have been unstoppable, and honestly, they kind of were. Farmers who ran the 855 reported that it could handle crop conditions that would choke other balers. Wet alfalfa? No problem. Stemmy grass hay? Chewed right through it. The bales came out dense, uniform, and well-shaped regardless of what you fed into it. So why did the 85 disappear? Two reasons. First, it was complicated. You had to maintain both a chain system and a belt system, which meant more parts, more adjustment points, and more things that could go wrong. Second, and this was the killer, it came out right when the agricultural economy was collapsing. In 1982 and 83, farmers were going bankrupt at rates not seen since the Great Depression. Nobody was buying expensive, complex hay balers, no matter how good they were. Sperry built the 85 for maybe 3 years before quietly discontinuing it. Today, finding one is like finding a unicorn, and the farmers who still have them guard them like treasure. Number 9. The Deutz-Fahr GP 230. Here's one that most American farmers have never even heard of. Deutz-Fahr was a German manufacturer that had massive success in Europe, but barely made a dent in North America. In 1984, they released the GP 230 round baler, and it featured technology that wouldn't become mainstream for another decade. The GP 230 had a fully variable chamber. Now, variable chamber round balers are common today. But in 1984, this was revolutionary. Most round balers made one size of bale, period. If you wanted different sized bales, you needed different balers. The GP 230 could make bales from 3 feet to 5 feet in diameter, all by adjusting a series of movable panels inside the bale chamber. One machine, multiple bale sizes, incredible flexibility, but the genius didn't stop there. Deutz-Fahr engineered the GP 230 with a pickup that could be hydraulically repositioned from the tractor seat. If you were baling light, fluffy hay, you could set the pickup aggressive. If you hit a heavy windrow, you could back it off without leaving the cab. This level of on-the-go adjustment was unheard of in the mid-80s. So why is it forgotten? Deutz-Fahr never established a strong dealer network in North America. The few GP 230s that made it to the US and Canada were orphans from day one. Parts were expensive and had to be shipped from Germany. Dealers didn't know how to service them, and American farmers, understandably, were reluctant to invest in a machine that didn't have local support. It's a shame, because the GP 230 was legitimately 10 years ahead of its time. The features it pioneered in 1984 didn't become industry standard until the mid-1990s. Number 8. The Gehl 1400. Gehl Manufacturing was known for making tough, simple equipment that worked. They weren't flashy, they weren't the most advanced, but they were reliable. In 1983, Gehl released the 1400 round baler, and it might have been the most underrated machine of the decade. The 1400 was a fixed chamber baler with a chain and slat design. Nothing revolutionary there. But what made it brilliant was the execution. Gehl obsessed over reliability. Every bearing was oversized. Every chain was industrial grade. Every wear point was designed for easy replacement. The 1400 wasn't trying to be the fastest baler or make the prettiest bales. It was designed to run all day, every day, in any conditions, without breaking down. The pickup on the 1400 was particularly clever. Instead of using spring-loaded tines like most balers, Gehl used rubber-mounted tines that could flex over obstacles without breaking. If you hit a rock or a piece of fence post, the tines would deflect and keep working. On conventional pickups, you'd snap tines and spend an hour replacing them. The 1400 just kept going. Why is it forgotten? Gehl was always a smaller manufacturer, and they just couldn't compete with the marketing budgets of John Deere, New Holland, and Case IH. The big companies had flashier products, more dealers, better financing options. The 1400 was brilliant, but it was a brilliant machine from a small company in a market dominated by giants. Gehl eventually got out of the hay equipment business entirely. Today, finding a 1400 in good condition is rare, but the farmers who have them absolutely refuse to sell. Number 7. The Ford 532. Ford's agricultural division in the 1980s was fighting for survival. They were trying to compete across the entire equipment line. And in 1985, they released the 532 square baler as their answer to the high-capacity market. This machine deserved so much more attention than it got. The 532 was designed around one central idea: maximize capacity without sacrificing bale quality. Ford's engineers studied the bottlenecks in conventional square balers and systematically eliminated them. The pickup was wider and more aggressive. The feeding system used a different timing that kept material flowing smoothly. The plunger stroke was optimized for faster cycling without increasing wear. The result was a baler that could produce 30 to 40% more bales per hour than comparable machines. But the real innovation was in the knotters. Square baler knotters are notoriously finicky. They need constant adjustment, they miss ties, they're the #1 source of downtime. Ford developed a knotter system for the 5000 tooth that was almost bulletproof. They used larger components, better materials, and a self-adjusting mechanism that compensated for wear. Farmers reported running entire seasons without touching the knotters, which was almost unheard of. So what happened? Ford was in financial trouble throughout the mid-80s. Their agricultural division was losing money, and there were constant rumors about them exiting the farm equipment business entirely. Dealers were nervous about stocking Ford equipment because they didn't know if parts would be available in 5 years. Farmers were nervous about buying Ford for the same reason. The 532 was a genuinely excellent baler, but it had a cloud of uncertainty hanging over it. In 1991, Ford sold their agricultural equipment division to New Holland. The 532 was quietly discontinued, and its innovations were absorbed into other product lines. Today, most farmers have never even heard of it, which is tragic, because the 532 solved problems that balers 10 years newer still struggled with. Number 6. The Hesston 5500. Hesston has always been an innovator in hay equipment. They practically invented the modern round baler. In 1986, they released the 5500, and it represented their vision for the future of large square baling. This machine was audacious. The 5500 made 3-foot by 4-foot bales, which were much larger than the standard 2-foot by 4-foot bales that dominated the market. The logic was sound. Bigger bales meant fewer bales to handle, less labor, more efficient storage and transport. For large operations and commercial hay producers, this was a game changer. One 5500 bale weighed as much as 3 or 4 conventional bales. But Hesston didn't just scale up an existing design. They completely rethought the large square baler. The 5500 used a pre-compression chamber that conditioned the hay before it entered the main baling chamber. This resulted in much more uniform density throughout the bale. They also used a unique plunger design that compressed from multiple angles, creating bales that held together better and shed water more effectively when stored outside. The knotting system on the 5500 was equally innovative. Instead of tying each bale individually, the 5500 used a continuous loop system, where bales stayed connected until they were ready to be ejected. This meant fewer knots, less twine usage, and higher reliability. It was elegant engineering. The problem was infrastructure. The entire hay industry was built around standard 2x4 bales. Hay barns were designed for them. Trucks were configured for them. Customers expected them. Switching to 3x4 bales meant changing your entire operation. For large, progressive operations, this was worthwhile. For everyone else, it was too much disruption. The 5500 was also expensive, significantly more than conventional large square balers. In the late 80s, with farm economics still shaky, that price premium was a tough sell. Hesston produced the 5500 for several years, but never achieved the market penetration they hoped for. It was eventually discontinued, and Hesston refocused on more conventional designs. The 5500 remains a what-if machine, a glimpse of an alternate timeline where the industry went in a different direction. Number 5. The Welger AP 530. Another European manufacturer that Americans barely remember. Welger was a German company that built some of the most ingenious hay equipment of the era. The AP 530 square baler, released in 1987, was a masterpiece of mechanical engineering that almost nobody outside of Europe ever saw. The AP 530 used what Welger called the Vario crop feeding system. Instead of using a standard auger or paddle feeder, the AP 530 had a series of individually controlled feeding fingers that actively managed crop flow into the baling chamber. These fingers could speed up, slow down, or even reverse based on crop density and baling conditions. The result was incredibly consistent bale density and the ability to handle extremely variable windrows without constant operator intervention. The genius of the Vario crop system was that it was entirely mechanical. There were no electronics, no sensors, no computers. Welger's engineers used a series of mechanical sensing mechanisms and feedback loops that automatically adjusted the feeding fingers based on the resistance they encountered. It was analog intelligence, and it worked beautifully. The AP 530 also featured a revolutionary plunger design. Traditional square balers have a single plunger that hammers straight into the bale chamber. The AP 530 used a compound plunger that compressed from two angles simultaneously. This created bales with much higher density at the edges, which prevented the common problem of square bales bulging and coming apart at the corners. European farmers, particularly in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, were huge fans of the AP 530. These areas have challenging terrain and variable weather, and the AP 530's ability to handle inconsistent crops was invaluable. The bales it produced were so well formed and dense that they could be stored outside with minimal covering and still have less spoilage than conventional bales stored under shelter. Number 4. The International Harvester 4000. International Harvester was collapsing in the mid-1980s. Years of financial mismanagement and brutal strikes had brought one of America's most iconic manufacturers to its knees. In what turned out to be one of their final acts before the agricultural division was sold off, IH released the 4000 round baler in 1984. It should have been their comeback machine. The 4000 was International's attempt to leapfrog the competition with technology. It featured one of the first true variable chamber designs in North America, years before competitors caught on. But the real innovation was in the drive system. Most round balers used either hydraulic or mechanical drives, each with advantages and disadvantages. The 4000 used a hybrid system that combined both. The pickup and initial bale forming used hydraulic drive, which gave infinite speed adjustment and smooth operation. The final compression and bale ejection used mechanical drive, which was more efficient and powerful. The system automatically transitioned between the two based on the baling cycle. It was sophisticated, efficient, and gave the operator precise control over every aspect of bale formation. So why did the 4000 fail? International Harvester was dying. By 1985, the company was bankrupt. The agricultural division was sold to Tenneco, which merged it with Case to create Case IH. In the chaos of the merger, the 4000 was discontinued. It was too complicated, too expensive to manufacture, and too associated with the failed IH brand. Case IH moved forward with simpler designs that shared more parts across their product lines. Today, the few remaining IH 4000 balers are treasured by collectors and old-line IH loyalists. They represent what might have been if International Harvester had survived. The technology in the 4000 wouldn't become mainstream for another 10 to 15 years, but IH had it working in 1984. It's one of agriculture's great what-if stories. Number 3. The Claas Rollant 66. Claas is a German agricultural giant that's enormous in Europe, but has always struggled to gain traction in North America. In 1988, they released the Rollant 66 round baler, and it was legitimately the most advanced round baler in the world at that moment. The problem was, almost nobody in America knew it existed. The Rollant 66 featured variable chamber technology, but Claas took it further than anyone else. They developed what they called automatic chamber control, which was an actual electronic system that monitored bale formation and adjusted chamber size and pressure in real time. This wasn't mechanical sensing or hydraulic feedback. This was genuine electronic control with sensors and a processor. The system worked brilliantly. The Rollant 66 could automatically compensate for changes in crop density, moisture content, and feeding rate. It would make perfect bales in conditions that would challenge the operator of a conventional baler. The electronics also provided diagnostics, maintenance reminders, and performance data. For 1988, this was Star Trek technology. European farmers who could afford the Rollant 66 considered it the ultimate round baler. It was expensive, but it delivered value through reliability, bale quality, and reduced operator fatigue. The electronics did so much of the work that even inexperienced operators could make expert quality bales. Claas made several attempts to establish themselves in North America with the Rollant 66, but they faced insurmountable obstacles. The dealer network was thin, parts were expensive and slow to arrive, and American farmers in the late 80s were deeply skeptical of electronics on farm equipment. There were too many horror stories of electronic systems failing in the field, leaving operators stranded. The Rollant 66's electronics were actually reliable, but the perception was there. By the early 1990s, Claas had essentially given up on the North American hay equipment market. The Rollant 66 remained a European machine, and its innovations slowly filtered into other manufacturers' products over the following decade. Today, very few North American farmers even know the Rollant 66 existed, much less that it was probably the best round baler of its era. Number 2. The Vicon RP 1200. Vicon was a Dutch company that made high-quality hay equipment primarily for the European market. They were known for innovative designs and excellent build quality. In 1989, they released the RP 1200 round baler, and it featured one idea that was so good, so obvious in retrospect that it's amazing no one had thought of it before. The RP 1200's innovation was the direct feed chamber design. In traditional round balers, hay is picked up by the pickup, transferred to a feed mechanism, then fed into the bale chamber. Each transfer point is a potential source of problems. Hay can bunch up, material can be lost, and throughput is limited. Vicon eliminated the intermediate steps. On the RP 1200, the pickup fed directly into the bale chamber with no intermediate transfer. The chamber was designed to accept material at a wider angle, and the belts that formed the bale started almost immediately behind the pickup. The result was dramatic: 30% higher capacity, significantly less hay loss, and virtually no plugging or bunching. The direct feed design also improved bale quality. Because the hay entered the chamber more smoothly, it layered more evenly as the bale formed. This created bales with better structure that held together better and had more consistent density throughout. For crops like alfalfa that can shatter and lose leaves, the reduced handling meant less leaf loss and higher quality hay. Vicon made attempts to sell the RP 1200 in North America, but the timing was terrible. The late 80s and early 90s were when the North American market was consolidating around a few major brands. Farmers wanted equipment from John Deere, New Holland, Case IH, maybe a few others. Buying from a Dutch company that might not be around in 5 years felt too risky, even if the equipment was superior. The RP 1200 remained primarily a European machine. Vicon's hay equipment division eventually became part of Kverneland Group, and while the direct feed concept influenced later designs, the RP 1200 itself faded into obscurity. Today, it's almost completely forgotten outside of specialized collector circles, despite being one of the most innovative round balers of the 1980s. Number 1. The Hesston 5800. Taking the top spot is a machine that represented the absolute pinnacle of 1980s hay baler technology, and yet almost nobody remembers it today. The Hesston 5800, released in 1989, was Hesston's answer to the question, what if we built the ultimate large square baler with no compromises? The 5800 made standard 3x3x8 bales, but it did so with technology that was at least a decade ahead of its time. The entire machine was controlled by what Hesston called the Intelligent Baling System, an electronic control system that managed every aspect of baler operation. This wasn't just monitoring, this was active control of the baling process. The IBS used multiple sensors throughout the baler to continuously monitor crop flow, bale density, plunger speed, and dozens of other parameters. It then adjusted feeding rate, plunger timing, and knotter operation in real time to optimize performance. The result was absolutely consistent bale quality regardless of crop variations or operator skill level. You could put a rookie on the 5800 and they'd make bales as good as a 20-year veteran on a conventional baler. But Hesston didn't stop there. The 5800 featured a revolutionary pre-compression system that used counter-rotating rollers to condition the hay before it entered the main baling chamber. This broke up clumps, aligned stems, and created a uniform mat that fed smoothly into the plunger chamber. The difference in bale quality was immediately visible. The 5800's bales were so uniform and well-formed that they looked machine-made in a way that conventional bales didn't. Farmers who ran the 5800 were absolutely blown away. The productivity was incredible. The bale quality was unmatched. The reliability was exceptional because the electronic systems prevented most problems before they occurred. For large commercial hay operations, the 5800 was a dream machine. So why does it take the #1 spot on this list of forgotten balers? Because it was too far ahead. The 5800 was released in 1989 at a price point of around $70,000, which was astronomical for that era. That's the equivalent of about $175,000 today. And it required a level of electronic sophistication that most farmers and mechanics weren't comfortable with in the late 80s. The timing was also terrible. The late 80s was still shaky for agriculture. Farmers who had survived the crisis earlier in the decade were cautious about big investments. And there was deep skepticism about electronics on farm equipment. Too many farmers had been burned by early electronic systems that failed in field conditions. Hesston only produced the 5800 for about 3 years before quietly discontinuing it. The technology was absorbed into other product lines, and the 5800 itself became a footnote. AGCO acquired Hesston in the early 90s, and the 5800 was too complex and expensive to fit into their streamlined product strategy. Today, finding a Hesston 5800 is extraordinarily rare. Maybe a few hundred were built total. The farmers who have them generally keep them running because they know they'll never find another baler that good. But outside of these small circles, the 5800 is almost completely forgotten. It's the ultimate example of a brilliant machine that was just too advanced for its time, too expensive for its market, and too unusual to survive the consolidation of the industry. The 5800 deserved to be remembered as a masterpiece. Instead, it's a ghost. These 10 balers deserved better than to be forgotten. They were brilliant machines built by smart people trying to solve real problems. The fact that we've forgotten them doesn't diminish what they accomplished. If anything, their obscurity makes their achievements more remarkable. They were ahead of their time, and that's rarely a comfortable place to be.